So good to see everyone here. We're so excited about this time. Let's begin our time with a word of prayer, if you don't mind it. Loving and gracious God, we gather today with hearts full of gratitude for the opportunity to connect, learn, and share stories that inspire. So as we welcome our guest, Anne Cross, may her words and experiences of extraordinary travels enrich our spirits and broaden our horizons. So bless our time together, guiding us toward deeper understanding, joy, and community. So we thank you for the gift of this gathering and the fellowship it brings. In your loving name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I want to turn to Kyle, back to you.
Okay, so we have a lovely presentation by Ann Cross, and I was wondering if we can all stay muted during her presentation, unless she has, opened up for Q&A, which I believe will be towards the end. And that's basically it. So Terry, take it away.
Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you today. We can all look for rainbows with the rain and the sun and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker today, Ann Cross. Ann loves to travel and she loves to tell stories. So today we have the pleasure of hearing Ann's journeys, her external as well as her internal journeys. And Ann says no matter where she goes, she always loves to come back home to California, her favorite state. And she's a fourth generation descendant. Ann had the opportunity to study abroad and spent a semester in Salzburg, Austria. And she also spent a year in Zimbabwe. She's a former English teacher and a history teacher. And she has joined those two pursuits over the years when she took LAUMC up to Ashland, Oregon, where we all saw the Shakespearean plays. And on the buses on the way up, Ann would educate us all so we would have a clue about what we were about to see, which was very informative. And we just had such a good time with her and all her good knowledge. Since the age of 6, Ann has been a Methodist. She was barefooted and she was an angel in a nativity scene at Christmas time. And she was up at the altar and she was so worried because she was barefooted and she wondered, oh, should I be up here without any shoes on? And so she's been a Methodist for a long time and she's been at LAUMC for over 25 years. Ann was a change maker, is a change maker, but her first project was creating community. And Ann has had many positions over the years, been involved in many things at LAUMC. She and her husband, John, have 2 children and 12 grandchildren. The family all live out of town. So the good news is Ann and John get to do a lot of traveling to see them. Ann is also an author and she's written 3 books and she's currently working on her memoir, which is called My Ordinary Extraordinary Life. And today we have the honor of hearing her talk about her ordinary, extraordinary travels. So with that, welcome, Ann. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a joy, and I feel very humbled to talk about travel experiences too. So, and thank you, Terry, for all you've done in the introductions. And Kyle, thank you so much for everything involving the tech. And there's a lot of pictures that you all are going to see, and it's all thanks to Kyle and to my husband John, has just worked like a trooper getting this ready to go. So let's go. Terry explained about the title, and it is so true when you talk to somebody and ask them to tell their stories, that they will say, "Oh, I just have an ordinary life," and but when they tell the stories, it is extraordinary. So I know you all out there have had extraordinary travel stories too. So I'm just honored to be telling a few myself. And I'm going to be looking at notes some of the time because I have to monitor myself so I don't get too involved telling stories and make it too long. So we're going to explore continent by continent, 6, not all 7, but that was the way I decided it would be good to get organized. So want to get started and see if you have your luggage packed and you've got a caretaker for your pets and the refrigerator's cleaned out of moldy things. You have your passport. And as you can see, we're going to Africa. We're going to start out there. I absolutely love to fly. I know that sounds crazy, but what's there not to like to be at a seat and somebody brings you something to eat, something to drink. And best of all, I love the window seat so I can see all the geology and the little farms and the mountains and snow and all the different things that you can see from the air. So Africa is our oldest continent and oldest of the human story. And it was my very first international experience. My parents had volunteered for a year of Dad doctoring in a Methodist mission station. And once he got the okay for all the kids, from all of us kids, right, Susan? Then we packed up the trunks. That should be the next slide. There I have 4 sibs, and there's Susan sitting next to me. I'm over there with and my folks, and these are the trunks are filled with medical supplies and other things that our local community donated to go with us to Africa. So first stop in Africa was a very meaningful one. It was to meet and talk with Dr. Albert Schweitzer. That was a dream of my parents. And so before we went to Zimbabwe, we were in the Congo, and that was quite an experience just getting there. First you fly, take a fighter pilot flight into the jungle and have 4 stops before you get to the river that's going to take you down to where the Schweitzer's Lamborghini, where their clinic was. The reason for the French fighter pilots was the jungle encroached on these landing strips so much, excuse me, in all the time. So you had to have somebody who could skillfully land the plane and then come to a stop before the jungle took over. So it was very nerve-wracking. Well, we made it through the 4 stops, and then we were at the river in a dugout canoe, and people came to greet us in the dugout canoe and took us down the river, which had crocodiles in it, to the shore. And Albert Schweitzer was right down there to meet us. One of the things he said was "die Kinder, die Kinder." The children. It was he had a lot of sick patients of children, but it was mostly dignitaries came to see him, and it was nice for him, I think, to see especially the younger sibs. So the visit was highlighted, I think, for my parents by meeting with him in his little tiny office. And my dad also went into surgery with him and said he'd never operated before or observed. Sorry, I'm nervous a little bit. I should not be nervous. that there were goats walking in and out of the surgery. Anyway, in the little meeting, he got right to the point, as often people who are significant don't beat around the bush. And he asked my parents, what are we going to do about nuclear war? And later he said to my mom, he said, you speak up. So and a little note to that, my mom did become a mover and a shaker on the Methodist Board of Global Ministries. And her specialty was issues that involved Africa. And years later, I was very involved, in some of you on this phone call, with Beyond War, a group that was working to get past using violence, such as nuclear war, for solving problems. Okay, so after we left Dr. Schweitzer, family went down to our assigned place, which was then it was called Southern Rhodesia. And next slide for the Zimbabwe. Okay, thank you. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner, the northeastern part is where we were. If you see the capital city there, Harare, used to be called Salisbury when I was there. A beautiful, well laid out city. But the tragedy of every night, the African citizens were locked in, had to get into a township and locked behind a gate, which it was just so awful, so wrong. To get from Harare up to sort of near where Mount Darwin is, we had to go by the city roads quickly give out, and then we drove on strip roads, and that's the next slide. Oh, we also wrote a book about our experiences. Next slide. I don't know what these things are on the screen. Did I do something? Anyway.
No, I have no idea what those are. I think John was doing something.
Oh, mystery. Anyway, we arrived in June, and I had just gotten my driver's license in California in April. So I love to drive, but driving these strip roads are really, really a challenge. You go really fast down these roads with your right wheel on the right-hand side, obviously. And then if a car is coming the other way, or a truck or a Land Rover, you have to instantly put one wheel on one strip and then the other goes out in the dirt. But because people drive on the left in Zimbabwe, the British way, you had to remember to go to the left and quickly. So it was a real new driver challenge to do it. Fortunately, I always remembered. So, the mission station it was a wonderful place to be, 80 miles out in the countryside, and my dad was one of 3 doctors in 100 square miles, so it's a huge responsibility. We all had our jobs. I think next slide. Yeah. These are the amazing baobab, and some of you who have been to Africa know about these trees. Don't they look like they were ripped out by some giant and turned upside down and rammed into the earth, and these are the roots coming out of the top of the tree. Next slide. My brother Al who was 15 at the time, went out with Reverend Marshall Ball to the outer district, and among other things, gave communion to people out in the surrounding areas. And these areas were so remote. There was no road. You just had to drive. Marcia Ball loved just taking the Land Rover and driving over the countryside. So next slide. One of the things I did was work at what was called a baby fold, and it was a kind of orphanage. But these were children whose mothers had died in childbirth, and the fathers were not able to take care of them. So they were in the baby fold only until they were old enough, like this little toddler is about ready to be able to join his dad in his village. But it was a real privilege to get to work with them. Next slide. Okay. Let's see, let me make sure I'm not. The year in Africa for me, I would never have missed it. It was so incredible. The kind of community and the fact that the country has long since been, the people were Christians, and I mean, anyway, there was third generation ministers, and it wasn't like we were coming from the United States and to take over or anything like that. I did miss that year in with my friends in high school, my junior year, although I was able to make it up by correspondence courses. And I found that if I could go, sometimes when I was missing that part of my life, that was a chance to be off in near some trees in a little place by myself and just renew and gain, meditation and a closeness to God from being in nature. Fast forward years later. Oh, no, I want to talk about Africa University here. And I think I'm just so grateful. Oh, okay. I'm just so grateful for what the Methodist Church has done in Africa and what our church has done for Africa University and pledging over $130,000 for scholarships. Next slide. I had the chance, my dad and brother and I and a fellow nurse, to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. It was incredible, all the different, you start off in coffee plantations or what it looks like, and next year in what would be Scottish heather, and then all the way, eventually there was what we thought of as a moonscape, even though it was 8 years before anybody walked on the moon. The lack of oxygen was a huge issue. We were well trained, but I finally, on the last ascent, which was at 4 a.m, I fainted several times, and they said I couldn't go on. That's okay. My friend made it to the top, and she got the wreath, and then I helped her down. She was a nurse, and she said her headache was so bad that she thought she was going to die. So I'm glad I had that experience. Next slide. Years later, John and I started working with and were part of, and I was on the board, this is a graduation, of a remarkable school called Orkeswa School. And there were, my sister Kay and I organized people who were volunteers who wanted to go over, and there were about 35 of us, many of them Methodists. this is just a wonderful project, and the school is such a success story. I wish I had more time to talk about it. Okay, next slide. All right. As a sophomore in college, I spent a semester in Salzburg, Austria. And here's the lovely, wonderful town of Salzburg. And it was really an amazing way to have education because we learned German, and when we went behind the curtain, when we were studying religion, we had a professor who was also an Episcopal priest who helped us understand ritual and accompanying us to kneeling in front of the altar to receive communion. We had a political science professor who took us behind the Iron Curtain in Budapest. We had Dr. Tritt, who was an orchestra conductor, and introduced me to opera, something that I would not have done. Next slide. Oh, and art and culture, we went straight down to Italy and studied that. I fell in love with Michelangelo's David. So what a way to see art. It's just right to be right there. Next slide. Here's the opera house in Wien, in Vienna, inside and out. Thank you, Kyle, for these photos. That's wonderful. When tragedy struck while we were there, and we learned of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Next slide. The Europeans felt so badly too and wanted to express their condolences. So they had a kind of memorial service, and they wanted to have us be there to express how they felt and to represent our country. Post college time in Europe included Ireland, getting to be in, next slide. I got to be in the St. Patrick's Day parade twice. So that was really fun. Next slide. And then a recent trip to Ireland. This wonderful friend, Amber Liggett, the mom in the middle, toured us all around. And I said, I really wanted to go to the Book of Kells. And she said, oh, that would be great, because her kids hadn't seen it yet either. And the kids were very involved with showing us around. And except for the littlest one, the other three had memorized a little piece of paper about something that they showed us as we walked around the city. It was so precious. It was really fun. Next slide. One of my favorite, on a British Isles tour, one of my favorite places was to go to the Beatles Museum in Liverpool. And if you get the chance, it is really great. That's their actual stage. And the job of the museum was just terrific. Next slide. This was Christmas of 2023, where we traveled to Berlin to see some friends, and they just welcomed us with open arms. Next slide. In Christmas market. Next slide. And these are one of the families that we've known the grandparents for years, and their two granddaughters, just super fun, wonderful people. Next slide. We spent 2 weeks in Italy. We've had other trips to Italy, but 2 wonderful weeks with our friends Tom and Marilyn. on what was called an untour, where you had a place on a hilltop, and then every day you explored around and saw and enjoyed all the different restaurants. And this is a white truffle. We were there for white truffle season, which was very rare. And we found a restaurant that we decided we'd come back for at dinner. And I ordered some white truffle. And the restaurant, everyone stopped and looked at me as they prepared. They brought the truffle out and had a little scale there. And I didn't know what to do. I knew all the convention for wine tasting, but no idea. So I finally just bent over, like, I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to smell it. No, maybe I'm supposed to take a little bite. They whipped that away from me so fast. That's not what you do. Every little shedding of anyway, that's not what you're supposed to do. So luckily they saved it by keeping it away from me, and they took it back in the kitchen to shave off part of it and cook it for me. Next slide. Part of Europe for a lot of us is exploring our roots. I mean, everybody does that all over the world, but some of my roots are in Lauterbrunnen in Switzerland, and in the village there's a little church with clocks on all four sides. That's very Swiss, of all four sides of the steeple, and that's where my great-grandparents, and also George, who's on this call, and also my sister Susan, that's where our great-grandparents were married. And yeah. Next slide. Sometimes we go on Viking trips, and river trips are another way, especially as you're getting older and it's harder to get around all the time. And the long ships are just a beautiful way to travel and get off and enjoy things in the countryside and take excursions. I couldn't believe when we arrived here for this trip to Paris that we were right there by the Eiffel Tower. Next slide. And on that particular trip, we arrived and had dinner there on my birthday. And then our friends, Joyce and David, were jet lagged and went to bed. And I was so excited, I just couldn't go to bed. So I went up on the top and saw the Eiffel Tower, and all of a sudden it did its once every hour twinkling, and it was so cool. I decided it was personally for my birthday. Next slide. And also we've taken a lot of Viking on a number of cruise ships, but especially like the Viking ocean ships and river and the and Windstar. Next slide. Okay, now we are going into Asia and South Pacific. And let me check on how I'm doing. Oh, I got to really speed this along. In Japan, loved the the food, the beautiful gardens, the Buddhist temples, and people were so polite and helpful. And I had difficulty on the train. 20 minutes. Okay, all right. Going to Kyoto from Shinjuku, and someone he went out of his way to go back a station to show me I had overshot the train that I needed to get on. It was just so kind. We took the bullet train to Osaka. John was there on business, and when we met a group of Japanese Hewlett-Packard men and a few Americans for dinner, when we entered the restaurant, I saw a friend of ours, an HP executive, who got up from his spot and came down the long bar and gave me a hug and a kiss. And we were just being cordial. I didn't think much of it, but PDAs, public displays of affection like that, are quite unusual. And John and I did get very special treatment that night. Now on to Thailand. And the astonishing golden towers and pagodas and Buddha, the gold Buddha. Next slide. Thailand is full of beautiful Buddhas and glittery jewelry and real royalty in a royal barge that travels down a flower-filled river lacing through Bangkok. We also, when I asked Jan Grace, who many of you know, I said, there's a place that on the ocean that's supposed to be really great. And did you know what it is? And she said, yes, it's Phuket. It is beautiful, but you have to be very careful how you pronounce it. Next slide. The trip that Carol DeMonte and a few other friends led us on in southern India was an amazing explosion of all kinds of different experiences. Next slide. Inside and out of the Hindu temples are quite extraordinary. Next slide. And Susan O'Neill and I were roommates. Next slide. There's the Hamiltons. Next slide. Okay. Now jumping to southern India. From southern India to French Polynesia, one of my favorite places on earth. The lagoons and the perfect beaches and snorkeling. It's the best snorkeling in the world, I think. It's really quite wonderful. Sunsets and watching the outrigger practicing. Next slide. We've been twice, and the first time we were for 5 days on a charter trip where we went from island to island and enjoyed all the snorkeling. Next slide. Visited things like vanilla farms, and I know why vanilla is so expensive now, and pearl oyster farms. Next slide. And then the second time we went with a larger group of friends and had a wonderful time on Windstar, and overwater bungalows are the best. Next slide. New Zealand, a gorgeous country of green nature and jungles and forests and mountains, and you can see why the famous movies like Lord of the Rings were produced in New Zealand. We went there on the year 2000 with Gary and Jerry, our friends, and I was wondering where on earth we could be to be as close to the beginning of the new millennia as possible, and that was New Zealand. So we went on New Year's Eve. We went up to a dinner place on the mountaintop by gondola, and they warned us beforehand that they would stop the gondola at 11 o'clock and then resume it at 1 o'clock, because no one knew for sure what Y2K would do. Remember that situation? And of course, there was no issue at all with the gondolas. Our next slide. Okay, that's going to Australia. I'll just real quick, our son had been in New Zealand at the University of Otago for a term, And we asked him what to be sure to do. And he said, be sure to eat ice cream. The ice cream's the best in the world. Eat it early and often. And when we decided, we didn't know quite what he meant by early and often. Was that morning, or was it every day? And so we did both. This is a fairly recent trip with our friends Joyce and David to Australia and Bali. And the Aborigine civilization is the oldest existing civilization on Earth. We had this wonderful guide. Her first name was Emily, and she is an Aborigine. And she described all kinds of fascinating things, like girls are brought up by their mom, but also many other women who teach and instruct them. And anyway, it was just amazing stories. Next slide. There's our friends. Next slide. There were all these young women all dressed up for people watching in Sydney. And we were just thinking it was wonderful, but we couldn't believe there were so many people. So I went up and asked, and they're Swifties. They're going to a Taylor Swift concert that was happening while we were there. Next slide. We went snorkeling 2 times on the Great Barrier Reef, and the good news on conservation of the reef is the Australians are doing all kinds of amazing things to restore and to take care of the coral. So this is on a snorkeling trip. And next slide. And then we went to Bali, and there are 4 Bali dancers and 2 interlopers on that picture. Next slide. This is a Windstar ship. We're now in South and Central America. Next slide. There's my friend, the sloth. Aren't sloths just so cute? They're amazing. Costa Rica is an amazing country. It's an incredible success story. They have no army, so their money goes to kids and kids' education and national parks. Seniors have legacies to many beautiful national to leave their funds leave their funds to national parks, and that's just totally refreshing to see. And Windstar and other ships is a good way to travel within Costa Rica. Next slide. Next slide. We went through the Panama Canal, and that's quite an experience in itself. The mast of the ship was so high, you just swear that it's going to get buckled over, but it doesn't. Next slide. I arranged for a tour with Overseas Adventure Travel, which many of you know and travel with. And I think they do a really wonderful job. First stop was Peru and then Machu Picchu. And I really, the side of me that's intuitive and meditative was just blown away with how beautiful it was and the feelings of life that's gone on before there. In the afternoon of the second day, we had free time, and John knew exactly what I wanted to do, and that was to be by myself in the ruins and just take it all in and feel that the power and the mystery and the beauty. Next slide. Here are folks we traveled with, and some of you will recognize Larry and Kathy in there, Barnsley. Next slide. After that, we went to the Galapagos, and this is a blue-footed booby. I have a wonderful story to tell you about that, but I'm running late, so we'll go on. Let's see. Now we are doing North America. So starting with Mexico, I was a global volunteer in a remote village near Guanajuato, which was 6 hours by bus. And then when on that particular trip, I wanted to go to Mexico City as well, because the Museo Nacional de Antropología is the one of the best anthropological museums in the world. And if you have a chance, the restaurants in the museums and the pyramids in Mexico City are fantastic to see and study. Canada, another North American country, is, as we all know, just stunningly beautiful. Next slide. We went there to Lake Louise and several lodges nearby with one of our families. It was wonderful. Next slide. Okay. We for the United States, when the kids were little, we took a trip across the United States, that kind of thing, and we spent 7 weeks in the summer. Before that, we had a map up in the kitchen wall, and we would just decide that way places we wanted to go. So this was finally New York City and the Empire State Building. So that's Brian on the left and Eric on the right. Next. We were recently with the other family in Cedar Crested Butte, Colorado. And that was, we were talking about not skiing anymore. The whole family skied, and we were only so happy to have hot soup and things ready for them when they were done. It's a beautiful place, but very cold. One of the most remarkable experiences and trips we've ever taken was going down the Grand Canyon. It's a total immersion into God's creation. It's extreme adventure navigating with guides down the grandfather of all rapids. And then and that's very exciting and very scary. And then there's the peaceful times. Parts of the river are not flowing, they're still and not in rapids. And one of the most amazing experiences for me in my life was hearing a Native American flute being played up a canyon. One of our guides left and played that flute. Next slide. From the Sierras to the Pacific, I love our state. I know you all do too. And some of you are not Californians, so it should be more inclusive here. And we also love going to Bear Valley. Next slide. In the summer, and next slide. In the winter. Okay. How am I doing? Do I have time to tell one other quick story? I think so. I'll just go for it. It's a story about going to Mississippi on a work trip from this church, and Mark Bullwinkle was the leader of the group, and he had on his overalls. We called him Farmer John, changed it to Farmer Mark. Anyway, the work team was after Hurricane Katrina wrecked so many of the houses in Mississippi and other places. So our work team went there, and we were taking down walls down to the studs for houses, so that then the next teams in the future could come and help rebuild. So it was a sad mission to have to take the walls down, or the part, and also fumigate. But it was so interesting because we had 3 houses that we did, and they were all so different. The first people had FEMA trailers out on the parking, out on the sidewalk before their house, and one of the houses, the people were there and not really helping the team at all. There were some of the rooms were quite filthy with drug paraphernalia and all of that, and it was. I'm glad that we saw more than just this house and the attitude of the people. The second house was a young couple who had they had water for us, and they provided some snacks and things. They weren't there, but they did that, and that was a big difference. And I felt so badly because we had to tear out their breakfast room floor that they had just laid, and but that was another experience. But the best experience of all was a woman named Ruby. She was African American. She had to work during the day, so she couldn't help us until after work at 5 o'clock, whatever. She her house was stripped down to the studs, and she'd paid for her house, and it was all, and we were feeling for her how she would be feeling, and she said, "Oh, it's okay. I've always wanted a kitchen window." So it was that. I just loved Ruby and her attitude. The last day that we were there, we'd found out it was her birthday, and first I asked if she wanted to help us with the fumigation, and she did. So she got on. We got her a mask, and she got on, and she did that. And then after that, we all assembled in another room and sang happy birthday and had a wonderful time. So I'm going to end with that thought. And I just wanted to wind up with, traveling has expanded my soul. I have been personally enriched from all these experiences, and I'm deeply grateful. I'm grateful for these souvenirs that I've brought home. The sounds of a flute down a side canyon, the joy of dancing all around the world, the solitude in gardens at some of the temples, memories of water of varying blues, Michelangelo's David, the kindness of strangers, national parks from all over the world, the fragility of our planet and the efforts of many countries to work on climate change, and the hope that we can get in this country back to more concerns. Making it almost to the top of Kilimanjaro, and knowing I just did my best. The laughter and closeness of people we've traveled with, and being at one and knowing that we are all one.
Wow. It's so inspirational and fantastic. Thanks so much, Anne. Do you think you have a little more time for Q&A with us?
Sure.
Well, I mean, while I'm watching all your wonderful presentation, I feel that, oh, I wish I could quit my ministry here and then go to a travel agency kind of things to travel all over the world. Well, any comment or any questions for Anne? It's a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
And why did your father decide to go to Zimbabwe as opposed to another country?
Oh, that's a good question. It was at the time where Peace Corps was just about to be born, and the idea of people volunteering for shorter terms to go was just happening, and so their idea with the United Methodist Church missionary work, so called, was 5 years for Africa or India. And then you get 1 year at home back in the US. And that's just too much of that your whole family then are missionaries for their whole, you know what I'm saying? I'm saying that badly, but so it was, my parents proposed to the board that we go just for a year. And that was a new idea, and there were some barriers that they put in place. So my parents had to dance around a few things. But it was really the start of people knowing that they could go on international goodwill trips. And so the Board of Global Ministries assigned us to Zimbabwe.
And what's on your bucket list next?
Oh, gee.
You've done it all.
I'm really putting this together. I was astounded at how much, oh my gosh, and how many trips we didn't talk about. I think it just being wherever, life is so good, and yeah. Anyone?
Any other questions or comments?
And will there ever be another Ashland trip? Somebody asked me that. Why don't we go to Ashland? And I know it needs to have a leader and someone to do it. Would you be interested?
Oh, I would. I do get asked that a lot about this trip. That was really wonderful. And I think John's probably thinking, don't say yes, don't say yes. He's in another room. If I had enough support and people to help, perhaps we'd consider it again. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all you've done.
Hi, Anne.
Well, I feel very grateful and fortunate.
Anne, could you tell me where the best 3 places in the world to visit?
And your slides were fabulous, and all your stories, and we could just listen to you all day long. It's just so interesting to hear about all the places and the different experiences that you've had. And we just really appreciate you sharing that with us today. So thank you so much. Yay.
You're welcome. Thank you for giving me the chance. And I feel like I took too long and rambled.
No. Mark, still you want to hear answer from Anne? 3 places, top 3 here? Where are they? And
real quickly, before we depart, I just want you to know we have 2 programs coming up in April. April 25th, Sue Alvey will be talking on how to find acceptance and contentment in the midst of aging. Sounds like we should all just take a trip, a lovely Viking trip. And then on April 29th, which is a Tuesday, Art Changes Us is doing a special program for Gen to Gen folks at LAUMC in the Sequoia Room. It's the same program they're doing right now, workshop at Trinity, but Trinity has a flight of stairs to climb, and a lot of seniors don't choose or are unable to do that. So April 29th, and again, you'll get more information on both of these events, but please mark your calendar, and we look forward to seeing you again and again. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend and I appreciate all your participation and everything. And a special thanks to you, Ann, and your family.
And thank you, Terry.
And John,
Oh.
and John and Kyle especially too. Yeah.
Thanks so much again, and it was a wonderful journey for us too.
Well, thank you for being part of it, everyone. I really appreciate it.